Stormie Grace YouTube Academy, and today I will be covering lunar phases, planning with the cycles of the moon. During this session, we will be reviewing the moon in astrology, the difference between waxing and waning, the 4 seasons of the moon, the 8 phases of the moon, planning with the moon, and then our conclusion. As I said, my name is Robin Langford, and I am a certified life coach with the Life Coach School, a Stoic Witch, traditional astrologer, creatrix of the Wicked Veracity digital astrology calendar, and I love astrology. I began working with it by working with the moon and planning with the moon. So what is astrology and what is the purpose of astrology? In my experience, astrology says that there's a correlation between where the planets, including the moon, is placed at the moment of your birth and the events that will happen in your life and aspects of who you are. So if that's true, then some or all of life is predetermined. And being aware of that to any degree can help us accept and acclimate to our fate and our most authentic self. And that is the purpose of astrology. So why should you work with the moon? You've been working with the moon for as long as you've been alive. You've been able to see it and noticed, undoubtedly, that it goes between new and full. That may be as far as you've gotten, but it illustrates just how easy it is to track with no special software or understanding. You don't need to know anything about your personal chart, and you have plenty of room to grow because the number of astrological concepts you can use when working with the moon is immense. The easiest way to work with the moon is by noticing when it's growing in light or decreasing in light. As you plan, keep in mind if the moon is growing, it's better able to support your growth, and if it's diminishing in light, it's better able to support reflective activities. The moon's appearance changes throughout the month. The image you're seeing right now is from NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio, and it shows the moon going from a full phase, decreasing in light, and going to the new phase, and then increasing again, back to full. When the moon is moving from new to full and growing in light, it's a waxing moon. When the moon is moving from full to new and is diminishing in light, it's a waning moon. The easiest division of the moon is into 4 parts: the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, and the last quarter. The new moon is the beginning of the lunation cycle. It's the very first day of what some people call the new moon. It is representative of spring and ideal for planting seeds. The first quarter is representative of summer. It helps your intentions to grow. And just like flowers, you can't plant an intention and then ignore it and expect a healthy rose bush to appear. So it's important to continue following through during this period. The full moon is representative of fall, and it's a time to evaluate what you've accomplished and maybe hold a harvest festival to celebrate. The last quarter is representative of winter and is the time to think about what you want to let go of before the new year, or in this case, the new moon. It's a great time for releasing, and it's the period of time when you want to have the out with the old to make room for the new type of mentality. The phases of the moon once seemed very mysterious to me. How did people know what phase the moon was in? I poured through all of my astrology books trying to find the answer. All anyone would talk about, though, is what they mean, and I'll get to that too, but I wanted to know where the borders were. The most common division in astrology is 8 phases, and that includes the new moon, the waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, last quarter, and waning crescent. To get a better idea of this, you can look at the positions of the moon and the sun during each of the moon's phases and the moon as it appears from Earth during each phase. Think of astrology like advanced math plus philosophy. Aspects are the math part. What it all means is the philosophy part. Aspects are angles created from the 2 planets you're looking at. The phase of the moon is based on the aspect it's making to the sun, And this can be a little confusing for people, but it's important to remember that in astrology, the moon and the sun are considered planets. A lot of you will be familiar with the different phases of the moon, but may not be familiar with the aspects that are causing the phase. So what I've done here is I have made a composition of only the aspects that contribute to the phases of the moon and put them in order from new moon all the way to full moon and then back to new moon. So we start on the left with a conjunction, which means that the sun and the moon are together, and that's a new moon. When the moon moves 45 degrees away from the sun, that creates a semi-square, and you have the waxing crescent moon. At 90 degrees, you get a square aspect, and that creates the first quarter moon. At 135 degrees of separation, you get a sesquiquadrate, and that gives you the waxing gibbous moon, because remember, as the moon is growing in light, it is a waxing moon. When the moon is 180 degrees away from the sun, you have a full moon, and that just means they're opposite each other in the chart. Then we reverse the process as we go back towards a new moon. At 135 degrees away from becoming a new moon is the waning gibbous moon. At 90 degrees from rejoining the sun, it moves into the last quarter phase. At 45 degrees from joining the sun again, it becomes a waning crescent moon. And then at 0 degrees, when they're together again, you have another new moon. The new moon occurs when the moon and sun are conjunct. And you can see we're going to start as if the new moon is in Aries. And during this period between now and the crescent moon, you want to think about what it is you want to grow during this lunation. The waxing crescent occurs with the first semi-square between the moon and the sun after the new moon. And it's a great time to begin anything you want to increase, such as a budget to increase savings, a workout regimen to increase strength or flexibility, or a business venture. The first quarter moon occurs with the first square between the moon and the sun after the new moon. And this is where you really want to commit to anything that's working and revise if necessary. Now, what I did for the sample charts that we're using is I took the most recent Aries new moon, and I actually moved the planets to their corresponding signs for that entire lunation cycle so that you could see how they move with each other. The sun moves slower than the moon, and so while it has moved from Aries into Taurus, the moon has moved through Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and is now in Leo. And this is the 90-degree separation. The waxing gibbous occurs with the first sesquiquadrate between the moon and the sun after the new moon. During this phase, the moon is applying to the opposition with the sun and almost at its brightest. This is a great time for manifestation magic. The full moon occurs when the moon and sun are in opposite signs. As soon as the exact opposition is completed, the moon begins to decrease in light. A great time to begin anything you want to decrease, such as a budget to decrease spending or debt, or a diet to lose weight. If you'll notice, although we started this particular lunation cycle with an Aries new moon, the full moon is in Scorpio because the sun has now moved into Taurus, and for that opposition, the moon has to be in Scorpio. So the previous full moon would have been with the sun in Aries and the moon in Libra. The waning gibbous moon is sometimes also called the disseminating moon, and it occurs with the first sesquiquadrate between the moon and the sun after the full moon. As you can see, this is when the moon is one sign away from where the full moon was. The last quarter moon occurs with the first square between the moon and the sun after the full moon. The waning crescent moon is also called the balsamic moon, and it occurs with the first semi-square between the moon and the sun after the full moon. And you can see that it's about one sign away from becoming a new moon, and the next new moon will be in Taurus. After you are comfortable with the phases of the moon, you can start taking into consideration other factors that contribute to how the moon will feel to you and how in different ways that you can work with it. Some of these considerations include zodiac signs, transiting houses, void of course moons, eclipses, and then how you want to work with the new moon and the full moon. Zodiac signs. An astrology chart is a circle divided into 12 signs. Each sign is 30 degrees. And in zodiacal order, you start with Aries and you go counterclockwise. So Where the new moon was in our previous slides, that's Aries. And then you have Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. The moon goes into a new sign every 2-ish days. Tracking the movement of the moon through the signs will help you learn the order of the signs and how they feel experientially to you. Zodiac signs let you know how a planet is going to be expressing itself. Paying attention to the sign the moon is in lets you know the lunar vibe for the day. Learn how you personally respond to the moon in various signs so you can predict your energy levels and plan accordingly by tracking how you feel and noting the sign of the moon. A daily journal or notes in your planner work great for this purpose. It's important to note that you don't even need to calculate your natal chart to do this. You can use an ephemeris or a variety of apps or even My Calendar. Now we're going to briefly go through some keywords that go with each of the signs so that you have a place to start while you're learning what the signs mean for you personally. Aries is associated with new beginnings, self-discovery, courage, and independence. Taurus is associated with money, resourcefulness, sensuality, and pleasure, perseverance, and being physical or physicality. Gemini is associated with communication and learning. Cancer is associated with emotions, health, self-care, and caring for others. Leo is associated with creativity, originality, self-confidence, and playfulness. Virgo is associated with analytical energy, efficiency, practicality, and organization. Libra is associated with beauty, balance, harmony, and diplomacy. Scorpio is associated with intensity, transformation, and the erotic. Sagittarius is associated with exploration, spirituality, and adventure. Capricorn is associated with structure, being deliberate, methodical, and being ambitious. Aquarius is associated with being rational, independent, and unorthodox. Pisces is associated with spirituality, inspiration, and intuition. I'd like to note that this is not a comprehensive list. There are many lists out there, and I will have several resources available to you at the end of the presentation if you want an even larger selection from which to choose. Transiting houses are another way that you can work with the moon. An astrological house indicates an area of life that is being activated in your chart. The only problem, it's not really a problem, but the only barrier for you to use this is that you have to calculate your natal chart in order to determine what house the moon is in at any given period for you personally. The moon moves through all 12 houses every cycle in the same way that it moves through all 12 zodiac signs. Houses are all assigned signs based on the time of your birth. I use whole sign houses, which means that every house only has one sign with it, but there are other house systems. It doesn't matter which one you use. You can calculate your chart to use whichever one you want, and then just pay attention to what house the moon is in at any given time based on the way you calculated your chart. House meanings and sign meanings are not equivalent, at least not the way that I practice astrology. In some traditions of astrology, they are equivalent. This is especially useful to know, however, when working with new and full moons. If you use both the house and the sign when you're working with those two energies, you'll get more nuance. This is a blank chart with just the astrology wheel, and the ascendant and descendant are marked, and then it has the house numbers. The first house is how you present yourself to the world. It has to do with your body and your health. You can see where the moon is right now is the first house. I want you to pay attention because there's no sign associated with that house other than the sign that's in your house. That's the reason I didn't put signs up here. I don't want you to always think that Aries has to be there because it doesn't. For instance, my rising sign or my ascendant, my first house sign is Libra. It could be literally any of the 12 signs, and that's why I took them out, because I want you to really think about the fact that the houses themselves are different from the signs. The second house is associated with money, finances, possessions, and talents. The third house is associated with communication, learning, and siblings. The fourth house is associated with home, parents, and family. The fifth house is associated with children, creativity, creative endeavors, pregnancy, romance, and dating. The 6th house is associated with daily work, subordinates, health routines, and your daily routine. Also, it can be associated with the job that you do every day, which can be different from, say, your purpose in the world. The 7th house is associated with one-on-one relationships, marriage, other people, partners, and enemies. The 8th house is associated with other people's money, death, and inheritance. The 9th house is associated with foreign places, higher education, philosophy, astrology, and travel. The 10th house is associated with your reputation, career or life purpose, superiors, and authority figures. The 11th house is associated with wishes, friends, groups, and networking. The 12th house is associated with time alone, enemies, confinement, service, and self-undoing or bad habits. Void of course moon, you have options. There's the Hellenistic option and the modern option. I personally pay attention to both, but for different reasons, which we will get into. The Hellenistic void of course moon. For the moon to be considered void of course in Hellenistic astrology, it means that the moon does not complete an exact aspect with any planet within the next 30 degrees, regardless of whether it's going to be within the same sign or another sign. This is very rare, and it only happens a few times a year at maximum. So, if you're going to take very, very seriously that the void of moon, you shouldn't do anything, you shouldn't initiate anything during the void of moon, the times of the year that I would say avoid initiating all the things would be when the moon is void based off of this definition. The modern definition, and the one that more people currently tend to use, is that the moon does not complete an exact aspect with another planet until it moves into the following sign of the zodiac. But this happens about every 2 to 3 days and can last from minutes to more than 24 hours. Things to avoid during the void of course moon, no matter which one you want to go with, or if you want to take it more seriously during the Hellenistic versus the modern, or if you just want to avoid these things altogether during any type of void of course moon, totally fine. My recommendations for things to avoid: a first date, meetings you hope will result in an action, like getting a new client or getting a raise, a good review, that sort of thing. Founding a business, getting married, and beginning anything important. Things you should totally go for during a void moon: spa day. That's a great one, right? Gives you an excuse every few days. Meditation, journaling, relaxing, deep work where you don't want to be disturbed, and finishing something you began previously. All right, so what does it all mean? Things that begin when the moon is void can be fruitless. If there's a Hellenistic void moon, chill and don't start new things. If there's a modern void moon, it's a good guideline, but don't get dogmatic. There are a lot of mitigating factors going on all the time. I'd recommend paying attention to how the void moon times play out in your life and keep a record in your journal or planner. Now let's talk about eclipses. There are 2 types of eclipses, a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse. Historically, these are not great times to do the things because light is literally being blocked. It's more of a shelter-in-place kind of vibe unless you really know what you're doing magically. Think of them as highlighting areas of your life that will have more emphasis for the next 6 months. Being able to see the lunar or solar eclipse where you are means it's even more significant. There are 2 types of lunar eclipses: total lunar eclipses and partial lunar eclipses. A total lunar eclipse occurs when the moon and the sun are on exact opposite sides of the earth. Although the moon is in the earth's shadow, some sunlight reaches the moon. The sunlight passes through Earth's atmosphere, which causes Earth's atmosphere to filter out most of the blue light. This is what makes the moon appear red to people on Earth. And it's also the most astrologically significant. A partial lunar eclipse happens when only a part of the moon enters Earth's shadow. In a partial eclipse, Earth's shadow appears very dark on the side of the moon facing Earth. What people see from Earth during a partial lunar eclipse depends on how the sun, Earth, and moon are lined up. While it's still important, it's not as important, astrologically speaking, as a total lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse usually only lasts for a few hours, and there are at least 2 partial lunar eclipses every year, but total lunar eclipses are rare. And it's totally safe to look at lunar eclipses. If you take time to sit under the moon as an eclipse is occurring, you'll get a feeling for just how powerful it would have been for ancient civilizations to experience an eclipse and a taste of what it would be like to be on such intimate terms with the planets. All right, there are 3 types of solar eclipses: total, partial, and annular. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon is between the sun and the earth. The first type is a total solar eclipse. A total solar eclipse is only visible from a small area on Earth. People who see the total eclipse are in the center of the moon's shadow when it hits Earth. The sky becomes very dark as if it were night, and for a total eclipse to take place, the sun, moon, and Earth must be in a direct line. This is the one that everyone remembers and talks about, and it's the most astrologically significant. The second type of solar eclipse is a partial solar eclipse. This happens when the sun, moon, and Earth are not exactly lined up. The sun appears to have a dark shadow on only a small part of its surface. While it's still important, and it would still be considered a negative omen in ancient astrology, it's not as important as a total solar eclipse. The third type is an annular eclipse. An annular eclipse happens when the moon is the furthest away from Earth. Because the moon is farther away from the Earth, it seems smaller and it does not block the entire view of the sun. The moon in front of the sun looks like a dark disk on top of a larger solar-colored disk. This creates what looks like a ring around the moon. Total solar eclipses happen about once every 18 months. Unlike lunar eclipses, solar eclipses are only in totality for a few minutes. So what does this mean for you when it comes to planning and rituals? Well, during a new moon eclipse, I wouldn't suggest setting new intentions or initiating new magic at this time. Remediation work is fine, as is shadow work. As for full moons, I still don't recommend magical work or releasing during this time, but again, remediation and shadow work are fine. In your resource section, I will have an article linked from Sphere and Sundry that goes into more depth on this topic, because there are a lot of things to take into consideration, and these general recommendations will suffice for now. But if you are interested, look for the Sphere and Sundry link below. New moon intentions. Okay. So what about a regular new moon when there's not an eclipse going on? So first things first, you don't have to do anything at the exact moment of the new moon, but you don't want to do it before the exact time. Because remember, before the moon hits the conjunction, it's still diminishing in light, right? And so that's still a time of releasing, and so you don't want to do your new moon ritual or your new moon work prior to that. Most people find they have a preference of doing their new moon work while the moon is in the same sign, or they wait until the light is visible, which is usually about 15 degrees or just over 24 hours later. Take into consideration the sign of the moon and the house if you know it when you're doing your intentions or any magical work with the moon. You can work your full moon magic either before or after the exact opposition, depending on what you want to accomplish. There are 2 ways that I like to work with the full moon, either with manifestation or releasing. If I want to manifest something that is relevant to the house the moon will be in, then I do my ritual prior to the exact opposition of the moon to the sun, because the energy is still building. If I have something I want to release that is relevant to the house the moon will be in, I do it after the exact opposition as the energy is dissipating. So if you remember nothing else from the entire presentation, I would like for you to remember these 3 things. From the new moon to the point of the full moon is the best time for growth. From the full moon to the new moon is the best time for reflection. And that if you want to take it a little bit further, define the areas in your life that are being affected and work intentionally with the moon using the sign and the house for your chart. As I was figuring out how to put this presentation together, I realized that I couldn't teach you everything I wanted to. So I put together a list of resources that will help you take your research to the next level. In this section, this is all about tracking the moon. The first resource that I have listed is my calendar, the digital astrology calendar, which I'll be talking more about in just a little bit. The second resource is the Honeycomb Collective Personal Almanac, which I am such a big fan of. They have a printed version and a PDF version that you can order that's customized to your birth chart, and it's just about the most magical thing I have ever seen. I highly recommend it. It will make your life so much easier. The third resource is astro.com, which is completely free, which allows you to calculate your own chart and or current transits. And there's also a link in the resource guide to Stormie's guide to casting a whole sign chart using astro.com. She makes it really easy. The next resource is the American Ephemeris. If you don't know what an ephemeris is, it's good to check out. It lists all of the planets and where they're going to be every day. Pretty cool, especially if you're old school and you don't want to use a digital resource. If you would like to use more digital resources, the Void of Course Moon Calculator allows you to calculate the Hellenistic and modern void moons, as well as a few other options. Very cool tool, completely free to use. The next resource will allow you to find solar and lunar eclipses for whatever location you're interested in. And the final resource in this section is a link to take you directly to the page on astro.com that shows you the location of the current moon and all of the other planets. I've also included a list of book recommendations to help you with your moon studies and astrology in general. My absolute favorite book for ancient astrology is Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice by Demetra George. It isn't a small book, and it is more of a textbook than an easy to follow cookbook. But if you really want to understand all the things, it is one of the best. The next book that I recommend is also by Demetra George, and it's Mysteries of the Dark Moon. It has more to do with it's not as complicated, it is also not as comprehensive, but has a lot of really good information. The next book that I recommend is by Donna Cunningham and is Moon Signs. It's an older book, but it has a wealth of information. It is more modern astrology than ancient astrology, but it'll walk you through the daily moon sign and its effect on you, using the daily moon signs for planning your yearly lunar path. It also talks about your birth moon and a little bit about eclipses. The next book is what I would describe as more of a cookbook style book. It's by Raven Caldera, Moon Phase Astrology, and it walks you through every phase of the moon in each sign of the moon and gives you an interpretation for all of them. It's a really good book to begin with to kind of help you conceptualize the way the different phases of the moon would behave in different signs. Very interesting book. The next book that I recommend is by Jan Spiller, New Moon Astrology. It was one of the first books that I bought when I was first working with the moon, and she recommends making wishes based off of each new moon and gives you a specific window, and then she has what she calls granddaddy periods of making wishes that corresponds with the 11th house. Again, this is a more of a modern astrology book, but I found it useful, and I think a lot of you might as well. The next book on my list is Moonology by Yasmin Boland. She goes through why the moon is magic, creating your dream life with the new moon, and she walks you through new moon manifestation, and then planning with the new moon, predicting your future with the new moon, and then working with the magic of the full moon, and living consciously with the daily moon. A wealth of information and a great place to start. The next book on my list is Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. I do believe this is out of print, but you can still find it in used bookstores and a variety of online booksellers. It and Astrological Transits by April Elliott Kent, which is a more recent addition to the market. They both just give you a better idea of how planets and the moon move through the different houses. So if you know your birth time and you have your birth chart, both of these books can give you added depth to working with the moon. The final selection of resources that I have for you is a podcast by Chris Brennan and Yasmin Boland, where they talk about defining the void of course moon. It's a really interesting episode of the podcast. I would also recommend any episode on the podcast at all. The next resource on this list is Common Misconceptions, How Eclipses Work in Astrology and Magic. This is an article written by the founder of Sphere and Sundry. It's a very interesting article, but above and beyond that, there are a ton of resources on the website. I would recommend anything that she's written, her husband has written, or anything in the shop. It's a great magical online space. And the final resource in this section is Make a Moon Phase Calendar and Calculator, and it's really great if you're more of a hands-on type person or you like crafts. I think it could be a lot of fun. To help you work with the moon phases, I've created a little handout for you that includes a moon phase journal, a new moon sheet, a full moon sheet, and a section for notes so that you can print out and create your own moon journal. You can also fill these in on your computer. They're totally fillable just in any kind of browser. I'm going to quickly run through how to use each of the pages. So this is where you would write what week it is. And so you might write the week of April 19th, 2021. Here you can see the days starting each week with Monday because it's the moon's day. And in this column, you're going to put the sign and the house if you know it. So in this example, I've put the symbol for Taurus and that it's in my 8th house. The next column is for the moon phase. And for this example, I'm listing it as a full moon. And this column is for your personal notes so that you can get a feeling for how the sign feels and how the moon phase feels for you personally. And so you can just write down all the things. The new moon sheet has a space for your intentions. I recommend writing at least one, but not more than 3. The reason for this is the more you constrain your focus, the greater the likelihood that you will follow through and manifest your intention. The next section is things to get done, and I included this because while putting a wish out there is great, magic requires a little more effort than that most of the time, as does manifestation. And so when you're thinking about your intentions, think about all the different things that would have to happen for them to manifest and make a list. The next section gives you a place to schedule it out. So once you have your list, put down the date and time that you're going to tackle each of the things on your list. Don't forget to show gratitude for all that you have already in relation to your intentions. And make sure to note the sign, house, and date for the new moon. The next sheet is our full moon page, and there's a section for releasing. Again, I would recommend choosing at least one thing that you want to release, whether that's an emotion or a habit, and focus on at least one thing, but no more than 3. Again, for the same reason, there's a better chance of following through if you constrain your focus. As with setting intentions or trying to create a manifestation, you will likely have things that you need to do in order to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to release. So for example, if you were trying to release the clutter in your bedroom, you would need to go through, say, the dresser, the nightstand, the closet, any storage areas, and clean them out and make a plan to donate them or sell them. So make a list of all the things that you need to do in order to complete the releasing, and then schedule it in your preferred calendar, whether that's a Google Calendar or a day planner. Again, you're going to want to put the sign, the house if you know it, and the date of the full moon, and gratitude for the things that you're releasing. The next handout that I've created for you includes the lunar phases for all of the time period between April 2021 and April 2023. These dates are in East Coast time, so you will need to calculate the difference if you live in a different time zone. And I know that this can be overwhelming for people when they look at a transit chart like this, so I am going to briefly go through what each of the columns means so that when you look at it, you will know what you're looking at. This first column is telling you the house for Planet 1, and for the purposes of this report, it is not relevant because it does not tell you the house the moon is in your chart. The second column lists Planet 1. For the purposes of this report, this will always be the moon. The third column tells you the aspect that the planets are making between each other, and this is going to be the aspect that creates the phase of the moon. You should be familiar with all of these aspects from the presentation earlier, but I am including a page in this handout that has that same information from the slide to make it a little bit easier. The only one that may not be familiar are the symbols for the solar and lunar eclipses. And this is what the solar eclipse looks like and the lunar eclipse. So if you see that symbol in the aspects, that's what it means. The fourth column is Planet 2, and for the purposes of this report, this will always be the Sun. The fifth column is House 2, and for the purposes of this report, it is not relevant because it does not tell you the house the Sun is in your chart. The sixth column is the Event column. The majority of it is not relevant for this report. However, sometimes it will show a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. Those are clearly marked for you so that if you miss the symbol in the aspect column, you should notice it here. The sixth column is the method, and this is a transit to transit report, but honestly, it's not really relevant for you. The eighth column is the date column. That's the date of the aspect in the Eastern time zone. If you live in Australia or further east, the date may be off by 1 day. The ninth column is the time. Again, all times are East Coast, and this is the time that the aspect is exact. The 10th column that's listed as age is completely irrelevant for this report. Just ignore it. The 11th column is position 1, and this is the degree of the moon. Think of it as the coordinates for the planet. For this particular example, this is 8 degrees in Taurus at 25 minutes. So that's 8 degrees Taurus, 25 minutes. That tells you the exact location of the moon. The next column tells you if the planet is retrograde or direct. However, the moon is always in direct motion. The next column tells you the degree of the sun. Again, this is just the coordinates for the planet. And the final column tells you whether the second planet is retrograde or direct, but the sun is always in direct motion. So this will allow you to track the phases of the moon without having to go anywhere or download anything. All you'll have to do is convert it to your time zone, and you'll have everything that you need to fill out the journal that I showed you previously. However, I don't like to have to do it manually, and so I created a calendar that does it for me, and I decided to make it available to other people. You can learn more about that at wickedveracity.com/calendar, but make sure you grab your coupon before you do that. But what that does is it shows all of the aspects for the planets as well as the moon. And so it even lists the degrees of the sun and the moon and the phase of the moon in the calendar for you, as well as the void, of course, and the last aspect before the moon went void. You can go get all of your moon goodies at www.wickedveracity.com/moonplan. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed your presentation.